Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Legion, Season 2, Episode 11. This is the season finale. And wow, were there some fireworks to be had. Some really depressing, could be interpreted a couple of ways, fireworks. I'm still processing. I've had a night to sleep on it. I've talked to my wife about this episode. I've read interviews with the creator. I have read thoughts of many other people, and I don't know. It's not that I don't know what happened, but there's two different camps about how to interpret this episode, and I fall in one of them, but I'll give both of them their due when the time comes. I'm getting ahead of myself, though, because we start off with just an awesome scene with David doing a musical number and Farouk doing a musical number of this song that I guess everybody else knows. I wasn't familiar with it, but I really enjoyed what it was and sort of how it fit the whole theme of, you know, being good or bad and what that means and revenge for love and how that can twist you around. All of that stuff was in this song that David and Farouk are singing to each other as they do their big psychic battle, right? They manifest these cool animated things that flash in the sky, and it's an echo of the battle we saw them have in episode 2 or 3, I want to say, but with sort of more fantastical elements and on a bigger scale. And this is sort of the big showdown moment you would expect to have at the end of this episode, and here we are at the beginning of the episode having it. And because there's some episodes going to turn some stuff on its head, Lenny is out there, and I respect to a lot of people who called this the tuning fork that is going to nullify their powers, right, is still out there, and it's landed upright. So Lenny sees it, and she's like, aha, I'll do this, and takes the shot at the tuning fork, sends the whirl thing out, and we get a great bit here that I wonder if this is a way of writing Melanie and Oliver Bird out of the show, right? Because we saw them meet up with each other. They've now finally been freed of Farouk's influence, and that was in the previous episode. And so now we see them in the future in the ice cube that we originally found Oliver in season 1. And they are living the astral plane life. They're enjoying sort of their, you know, non-bodied life together, even though their minds are slipping, like they're forgetting words and things in the same way that Oliver did. It's not clear exactly how time passes here, and they don't even seem super clear on it. But the upshot of this scene is that they reveal that things went real bad. At some point in the past 3 years, for them, things went bad, and they say that the cause of everything going wrong was that Sid reveals to David what he is, or his future, which is kind of interesting because that's sort of already the dynamic that future Sid and David have had, in that she is... Well, future Sid doesn't specifically spell out to David what his future is, but she spells out to him what the future is. I guess the idea that David finds out specifically that he could have caused that future is maybe what triggers it. But I'm not 100% on board with almost anything in this episode. Not that I didn't like it, not in that sense, but just like putting down a "this is definitely what's happening" thing is a little bit tricky these days. With the advent of the tuning fork getting hit, now David and Farouk are back to, you know, caveman tools. So David picks up a rock and starts smashing Farouk in the head. And what do you know? Farouk's little secret weapon, brainwashed Sid, shows up. And yes, I am... just so you guys know my biases, I think that Sid is coming from a place of having been deceived by Farouk in this scene. I think that what Farouk showed her was a cherry-picked version of the truth to fit his narrative. And we talked about that last episode. And it also fits in with the narration, the sort of John Hamm delusion egg sort of title card things we've been getting, where he talks about the the cell phone, right? The looking at the world through a screen, the allegory of the cave, and it takes place literally in a cave. She's the one who's in the cave here, all right? She's the one who's watching the puppets on the wall. It's her who's seeing the false version of reality. I'm just putting my stake down on, at least for sure, Farouk is deceiving some people, all right? Now, we'll get into whether David is like actually a good person anyway, but I think that Farouk has overblown what David's threat level is in Sid's mind, and she is ready to shoot him. Like, straight up kill him. Like, murder this dude who has not... Okay, she saw him beating up Oliver, right? But David thought Oliver was, had Farouk inside of him, and this was the only way to get the information out. We all know this. Sid doesn't know that at the time. At least, I don't think she does. She doesn't acknowledge that she knows it. It's weird that she's gone as far as she has. Not that she doesn't trust David. I do buy that. But that she's willing to kill him in this moment to stop him from killing Farouk. Like, we know Farouk a bad guy. Okay? We saw him kill people earlier in this in this season when he's raiding Division 3. He turned a dude into a fish. He's not the good guy. Just because he's in opposition to David, and maybe David also has some problems, Farouk does not deserve to be saved by Sid. And she shoots Dave at David, right? David splashes into sort of the interior of his mind, which I guess is something that, like, when David is undergoing an extreme level of psychic stress, maybe this is sort of what was happening in the alternate timeline episode as well, where he experiences reality differently for a little bit, and he goes and he sees these other two versions of himself. And the first version, by the way, if you guys are watching with subtitles, these two characters are named differently. There's David, who's the main David, and then the first alternate David that showed up is called Divad, D-I-V-A-D, D-I-V, yeah, I said it right. And then the second David who showed up is called DVD. I don't know if that means anything other than just sort of having a signifier in the script, but I thought it was a cool little Easter egg. If you were watching with subtitles on, you noticed that. And Divad tells David the delusion, right? Because he has that little... a delusion starts like any other idea thing playing in this TV in his mind. And Divad tells David that the delusion that he's suffering from is that he's a good person and that he deserves love. And again, for all of those of you who are taking what sort of is being said at face value, I have to assert just my personal belief that even people who seeing yourself as a good person is not a bad thing. I mean, not to the point where you excuse all of your bad behavior, but if trying to become that person that is better than the person you are because that's the image of yourself that you have in your mind is not a delusion, okay? And the idea that you deserve love, that anybody deserves love, is also not a delusion. I refuse to accept that narrative, okay? This is yet another thing that is worming its way into David's mind. Now, I don't know how this gets to David, all right? The fact that these are the things inside David's mind talking to him, I don't know if we could say that maybe they're echoes of what Farouk had left in there and that these are seeds that he planted a long time ago, or if it's just... self-consciousness, self-loathing. It's just sort of everybody has that. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve anything. I think everybody goes through that from time to time. I have it hit me occasionally. I managed to fight through it. I don't have like a major problem with like depression or whatever, but I think everybody just has those moments where their emotions are like, you suck. So maybe that's what these are. I don't know how the John Hamm narration gets in here with all the stuff about the egg either. That implies to me that there's some kind of seed planting with Farouk going on here, but they plant this idea that this is a delusion, right? That the moment David saw Sid and liked her, right, that he was able to change his idea of himself and tell himself that he deserved to be with her. And here's where things start to get tricky, because we're dealing a lot in this show, especially specifically in this episode, but maybe throughout the show, with David's ability to control other people's minds. And there's a theory out there that in his quote-unquote delusion with all of his powers, that David has essentially been mind controlling Sid like this whole time. Like the only reason that she's in love with him is because he thinks that she should be, and his latent powers are strong enough where just subconsciously he's altering the way she thinks about him. I don't know if that's the case. Again, there's a lot of gray area. The problem is there's not like a visible change when people are being mind controlled that we see. In the next scene here, we're going to see David do something to Sid. All right, he puts his hand on her head, and that is a pretty clear signifier that he's changing something. But beyond that, like, how do you know if someone's thoughts are their own, right? There's the whole Division 3 thing has been saying, beware of thoughts that are not your own. If there's a mind control person, let alone two mind control people, by the way, because Farouk can do this too, just floating around out there in the world, reading minds, changing thoughts. What does that look like? How would you even know to be worried that your thoughts weren't your own if they can get in your head and change them? David doesn't have to be in the same room to change somebody's thoughts. He doesn't, apparently anyway. He does sort of do like a physical, sort of put his head up to Sid's head thing, his hand up to Sid's head while he's trying to erase this memory of her trying to shoot him. I think that's what's going on in this scene anyway. But beyond that, I don't know how you would even say if David's been mind controlling Sid, or even if David could say. If it's subconscious for him, how would you even know? So I hate questions that you can raise and then just in my mind can't answer. It's not, again, not a knock on the show. I don't have an answer for this one. I don't know how you would definitively say, because you don't really have a lot of Sid outside of David's influence, especially if David can send his mind all over the world. There is no outside of David's influence. But regardless, he wakes up from this sort of weird cycle. He removes the memory of Sid trying to shoot him, and in my mind, tries to undo anyway this insidious deceit that Farouk has sown in David's mind through Melanie. Remember, those of you who are, I do want to play both sides here, okay? But I really think it's important not to go down this David is now the bad guy and Farouk is the good guy narrative, because Farouk straight up stole people's bodies and again committed murder and used the stolen bodies to put this information in front of Sid to make her believe something about David that is not necessarily true. Now, David is not guiltless, all right? He has failures as in his relationship, I'd say. He's not as open as he probably should be. He's kept things from Sid. He's kind of cheated on her. That does not make him a supervillain, okay? That makes him kind of a bad guy. Like maybe, like somebody who kind of needs to work on his thing and open up a little bit more, but not like, I'm gonna murder you, which is what Farouk had Sid ready to do. Because future crime, I guess. We'll get to that. Division 3 comes in. They get Farouk. Lenny shoots the bullet out of the air. David obviously is not shot, but again, that was the intention that Sid had. Farouk and Lenny are both captured. Farouk gets a crown, which I thought was fascinating for the Shadow King. They have a thing around his head. David had a crown in season 1, so it's nice that, that this sort of, I guess David's crown was like a mental enhancer. I don't remember exactly how all the stuff that worked. We're going to continue talking, though, before I reveal too much of my ignorance. They get back to Division 3, and David is like, hey, Sid, let's go. Run away with me. And Sid had... This is a divisive scene as well. Okay, because... I want to be careful here because I don't want to diminish anything that any people had thoughts about. So they get back to Division 3. Sid's like, hey, let's me and you kind of go hang out. Sid is still probably feeling the after effects of whatever Farouk put in her mind, or she just doesn't feel right about anything anymore. So she's like, nah, I want to be on my own. David then goes to his room and astral projects into Sid's room. Now, this is a clear violation of boundaries, all right? The fact that she said, I want to be left alone, and David's like, yeah, but no, I don't want to leave you alone, so I'm going to bust into your room anyway as a ghost. That's, like, not cool, okay? However, what happens next is construed later in the show as non-consensual sex, as rape, all right? And in the scene, I didn't, like, what... Again, we're stuck with this weird place that we can't say definitively anything because David could have been mind controlling her. We don't know that he wasn't. There's not, like, his pupils don't dilate or something. His ears don't get pointy when he's using mind control. So maybe, all I can say is, to me, this scene just read like Sid wasn't really into the sex, but she was going to go along with it anyway, which is a place that I've been in, and I didn't feel like I was raped in that instance. The only thing that is a signifier that something's wrong is the score here. The score is getting, like, really creepy and that's just letting you know that things are about to go wrong. But I don't know. This is a hugely a matter of interpretation. It's weird to talk about, especially in the era of, the Me Too movement, where women are speaking up about having been raped, and then guys are saying, well, no, you weren't actually. But we see this happen. It doesn't look like a rape to me. In hindsight, you could say it was because of what happens later, but also Sid clearly is not having thoughts that are her own. And particularly because not only in just the thoughts that are not your own, but also a lot of these delusions talk about moral panic, right? The community rising up against somebody who they perceive as a threat, even though they might not have been a threat. That's clearly an allegory for what's about to happen to David. All right, the 9 wise men and the 10th wise man. The fact that you can by consensus create reality. That's also clearly an homage, an image of what's gonna happen here to David, and yet people are just taking everything that Sid says at face value as the truth. The reason that I think that this is not necessarily cut and dried, like that this is definitely what happened, is because David goes to visit Farouk. He has his typical, like, I've won, and Farouk's like, no, you haven't, which he really hasn't. And then after he leaves, Farouk goes and whispers in the ear of this rat, which I thought was a great callback, by the way, to the rat that David was hanging out with in the alternate universe. It's also an interesting bit of sort of folklore, not exposition. What am I using? Like they're pulling from Norse mythology here. In a sense, there is in Norse mythology a squirrel that runs up and down Yggdrasil carrying discord and whispering evil thoughts into people's ears as they sleep. And I know about this because of The Amazing Squirrel Girl, the comic book, not because I'm a student of Norse mythology, but this is very clearly like an instance of that, of this rodent that is going to sow discord by whispering in at least one person's ear. It goes to Sid and whispers in her ear. By the way, the squirrel that carries the discord is called Ratatosker, so having it be a rat in this incarnation kind of works. In the meantime of all this happening, Carrie and Carrie are sort of reviewing the crime scene footage, essentially. Like, they have a whole reconstruction thing or whatever, but essentially they're reviewing the footage of the fight, and Carrie, the male Carrie, sees David do his mind-wipey thing on Sid, and his take on that is that exactly what Farouk wants him to think, by the way. I think, this is my take again, that he is just mind controlling her to be the thing that he wants. There's another sort of little interlude about the Ship of Fools, which is sort of the idea that maybe if everybody's crazy, then that just becomes the reality. And David comes into the trial room expecting to see Farouk go on trial, and they get him. He's trapped inside this orb. Again, you gotta stay away from orbs, David. It's bad for you. And he is put on trial for a future crime that he might commit. I mean, David's understandably upset about this, and I am also upset. Like, that's not how justice works. All right? It makes kind of sense. Like, so the logic here is they've been deconstructing this orb that David was in at the end of season 1 for like all of season 2, and they've just now discovered that they're 98% sure that Carrie Loudermilk made the orb, that he created this thing, and he must have sent it back in time to capture David because he was afraid that David was going to do something and hurt the world. I think that's the logic here. Sid also brings up, David's like, no, I'm a good guy, I'm your friend, remember? I'm on your side. And Sid at this point makes the accusation of rape. And I've already sort of put out my problems with that read on that scene, but again, it's impossible to know for sure because we can't be inside the people's minds well, we can, but they didn't let us be inside their minds in the show. I will say, when Fukuyama, well, no, it doesn't matter. I was gonna say that Sid was on top for that scene, but then Fukuyama, like, if David's mind controlling, then literally anything is possible if David was mind controlling her. They've convinced themselves so much that this is the case that they've decided to let Farouk out. And I want to once again hit this nail on the head. Farouk, whether or not you think David raped Sid and has been mind controlling her to love him this whole time and is actually the monster that we all think he is, whether or not that's the case, and I don't buy into it, but I understand the argument and the belief that, how you could go that way. Farouk's not the good guy. I know I've already said this, but he's just not. There doesn't have to be an either or. They don't have to be both green or one red and one green. Farouk has killed people. He has stolen people's lives. Like, kidnapping, essentially taking over, he took over Melanie Bird, he took over Oliver Bird. They're not here, by the way, to talk about the stuff that they went through. The biggest alarm sign that these people are not in their right mind accusing David here is the fact that they've just let Farouk walk free. What the heck? That's not cool. That is not an either or situation. They're clearly under some kind of a delusion, like moral panic. Unfortunately, when you're under that kind of a delusion, when you push somebody back against the wall and tell them they're evil, and because of that we're gonna drug you and turn you into a zombie, you might actually turn him into an evil thing. And whether or not I think David was unhinged and doing this stuff before, he is 100% gonna go and do it now because that's what everybody expects of him. There is no societal expectation that he be anything other than the villain, so why not just go for it, David? And he does. He busts loose, he gets Lenny, and they are off to the races, doing their thing. It was a weird process watching this show, and especially because I had immediately, my instinct was to side with David here, right? To look at these other people in the room and say, you guys are clearly part of this delusion that Farouk is setting up, including David a little bit, by the way, I think, because he's starting to doubt whether he's a good person and whether he deserves love. And if you start to doubt that, that's like a real bad place to be. Okay? You do. And you are, by the way, if you're watching this. My read on it was, okay, this is just a brilliant turnaround for Farouk. And then I went and started reading other people's opinions, and the fact that they are all, not all, I'd say about 50-50. Half of the people are on Farouk's side here, or at least anti-David's side, it sort of took the wind out of my sails a little bit, but in a good way. Like, it's got me thinking. I like something that challenges me, and the fact that I'm coming to you again with a point of view, and it is the first point of view that I had, all right? But the fact that I really had to sit down and think, like, is this really what I believe? I mean, somebody even posted an interview with Noah Hawley, where the interviewer asked him a question about the scene between David and Sid in the context of, like, in the question, it was an assumption that it was rape. It's like, well, there's a scene where David rapes Sid. And since I didn't agree with that, I was like, wait a minute. But then Noah Hawley doesn't, he goes along with that assumption at the very least. So I'm giving you like what the creator of the show said, and I'm still not 100% on board with that idea. I'll cite death of the author in this case, but I don't, I'm sure we'll find out in season 3. If they keep saying it, does it become true? If season 3 just continues this narrative that David raped Sid, is that just what the truth is now? Regardless of any particular evidence that we have as an audience? I don't know. I really enjoy that this has made me ask these questions, though. And, excuse me, got pneumonia. Almost done with it, though. I love a show that is challenging like this. And honestly, I was trying to think, I really feel like that this episode did, in fact, justify almost all of my concerns about stuff that was happening throughout the season before. I do wish that the story throughout the season had been a little bit more like for instance, the mind maze thing. I felt like that was a little bit of a diversion that doesn't necessarily lead us to where we are. It tells us more about the characters, right, in some sense. But the fact that Farouk, in essentially one episode, corrupts Sid, I think that could have been a whole season arc where Sid is starting to distrust David and distrust him more, and Farouk is able to somehow get inside her mind and just push her in the direction of distrust. He kind of does it. It all depends on where you think the orb is from and who you think future Sid is, if she's real, if she's the thing that Farouk created. There's still a lot of open questions. I mean, this is not the problem that future Sid was warning them about, right? Future Sid was worried about if David kills Farouk, then something bad happens, all right? And my read on that was that there's you just don't want to destroy Farouk's body. Maybe there is another bad thing that goes on with David, but they do find Farouk's body. They've got him now. So whatever David is about to wreak on the world is not the apocalypse that future Sid has been fighting. She, I guess, avoided that. Again, if she even really exists, or is she some kind of construct of Carrie Loudermilk and or Farouk working with Carrie Loudermilk in the future? My head hurts. My head hurts, and I don't have all the answers. I would love to hear what you guys think. This is more than usual an episode where there's a lot of room for interpretation, and I want to keep an open mind. So I hope this hasn't come off as me saying, now the thing I've said is right. I'm telling you my opinion and the reasons I have for it, but I don't want that to come across as me trying to squish other opinions, especially if you have sort of other facts that I'm not thinking of to bring into it. I really appreciate all the dialogue we've been able to have over this show in the past with the comments, and I hope that you guys will continue to leave them as, well, this is the last episode, so, but, you know, to sort of help me work through what I'm trying to figure out about this show, because I don't know everything. And I appreciate comments that correct me, by the way. I just as a word of advice, like, go ahead and say, like, you got this wrong. I've had a couple comments this week that's like, you got this wrong and you're an idiot. And just as a, like, first of all, as an ego, I don't, like, enjoy that from a personal standpoint. But also, I think if you're trying to, you know, like, change somebody, like, if you actually do want them to stop doing the thing wrong, you know, like, just don't include the you're an idiot part. And I know that it's easy to get frustrated on the internet, but just as like a word of advice, you can take it or leave it. I can take the criticism. It's just, you know, it feels like, well, I'd rather just you say like, oh, you got this wrong, dude, and I'll do my best to correct it. I'm not so egotistical. I need my feelings. I need you to be nice. Anyway, that's going to do it for this week, folks. There will not be another Legion recap next week for you to tune into. However, I am looking into some shows to continue recapping going forward. They will maybe not all be on this level. I enjoy a little pulpy TV as well, although Legion's kind of pulpy in a sense. But if you have shows that are coming up, the premieres are upcoming, that you are excited about, I am accepting suggestions, not necessarily going to honor anything specifically, but I definitely, if there's something that you want to bring my attention to that I may not have heard of, leave them also in the comments there, and I will talk to you guys later. Take care, y'all.